Good evening. My name is Jada Mangrum. I serve as chair of the Legislative Issues Committee of the Magnolia, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. And thank you for tuning to Outfront Issues Part 2. On behalf of the Magnolia, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated and our president, Dion Griffin, we welcome you. Tonight we have some really hot topics to discuss. Before we dive in, I would like to introduce you to our moderator for the evening, Miss Lisa Ram. Lisa is a broadcast veteran with strong ties to the Atlanta community. She is host of Morning Edition and can be heard on Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on WABE, where Atlanta meets NPR. Lisa has extensive experience in radio and in television and spent 21 years as Fox 5 Atlanta's. She has previously served as Capitol correspondent for 2 legislative sessions for Georgia's public broadcasting lawmakers. Prior to that, she was the noon and 6 p.m. anchor at Fox 5 Atlanta. Lisa has worked in radio in both Phoenix and Prescott, Arizona at stations KOOL-FM and KYCA-AM. She has won numerous awards for her reporting as well as many recognitions for her community service. She's also a member of the Magnolia, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. Most notably, she served as moderator for Georgia's runoff Senate race and has made several appearances on both CNN and MSNBC reporting on the elections in Georgia. Without further ado, here's Jada Ram.
Thank you so much, Jada. And I'm going to give you a bravo because you were managing the cute little dog there and your intro. And that's a true professional. So thank you so much for your warm intro and your warm welcome this evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I am so excited to be a part of Outfront Issues Part 2. I heard about Part 1, and tonight it's timely that each and every one of us is here because we're in a time and a place that yields itself to discussion. Think about where you were last Wednesday when the events in Washington started to unfold at our nation's capital. Think about how you felt. Think about what you were thinking about in terms of the state of the nation, the state of your individual communities, and the state of yourself, and just how that pierced your psyche in some way. We need to talk. We need to talk. We need to talk about the issues. We need to talk about what we're feeling. We need to talk and get a clear understanding of what's happening in this year, 2021. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists this evening. First, I'd like to introduce Devin Schindler. Devin is a professor who has expertise in constitutional law, including all aspects of the First Amendment, due process, equal protection, separation of powers, presidential powers, and federalism. Professor Schindler has over 25 years of experience on a variety of healthcare compliance issues, including anti-kickback, Stark, billing fraud, and third-party player relations. He is very experienced and is here to talk tonight and share his expertise. Welcome. It's good to have you here. Thank you. In addition to Devin Schindler, we have Sheriff-elect Craig Owens. He is a law enforcement professional for more than 30 years of service to his local community and to the United States military. In November of 2020, Sheriff Owens made history by becoming the first African-American elected to be Sheriff of Cobb County, a major milestone there. Running on a platform of truth, trust, and transparency, he won the Democratic nomination outright and then went on to overtake an entrenched incumbent by earning 55% of the vote. So that says people in Cobb County were looking for a definite change. So welcome to you. Welcome, Sheriff Owens, tonight.
Thank you. Welcome. Good night, everyone.
Also here is Aaron Martin. Aaron serves as policy counsel for the Public Policy Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, where she advocates for judicial integrity and the advancement and protection of civil rights at the federal level. Prior to joining the Lawyers Committee, she was a staff attorney at the Center for Reproductive Rights. She has also served at the U.S. Department of Justice, where she focused on consumer protection and appellate civil rights matters. Welcome, Erin Martin, this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us this evening is Dr. Stuart Lord. Dr. Lord is the president and CEO of Delta Development Organizational Solutions for Leadership Development and is pretty well versed in higher education administration and leadership, organization development, institutional diversity and inclusion, and business operations. He brings over 25 years of senior executive leadership in strategic planning, leadership development, and executive coaching. Dr. Lord, we welcome you this evening.
Thank you.
Soon to join us is Andrea Young. She's running a little late, but she will be joining us. And I'd like to read her bio as well. Andrea Young joined the ACLU of Georgia as executive director in January of 2017. Under her leadership, the organization has grown in influence, impact, and membership, battling injustice and inequality through the courts, legislative advocacy, and community engagement. Voter rights, women's rights, and criminal legal system reform are her priorities since 2020, and she has developed a 2020-2023 strategic plan addressing those areas. So we welcome Andrea when she comes, and she will join our all-important discussion. So welcome to you all. Oh, there's Andrea. I see you. There you are. Welcome. Good to have you. Welcome to you all. And like I said, the discussion that we're about to have is pretty timely because people in all of our communities have questions. They have questions that they need answers to. So hopefully they can get some of that information from you this evening. So I'm going to kick off the discussion because there's been a lot of chatter recently about defunding police. And some people say, oh my gosh, that can't happen. That'll be the worst thing that happens. But truth be told, a lot of people don't understand what that means. So Andrea, let's begin with you. What does defund the police mean? Andrea, we are having trouble hearing you. You may want to click, you might be muted. Is your mic muted there? Okay, well, while she works out that kink, Jada, maybe you could work with her on her audio. But Sheriff Owens, we'll ask you because I'm sure people have asked you, what does it mean to defund police?
Well, I hear that question a lot, but to me, I think our citizens should always want the people who protect and serve them to receive proper training, proper education, and proper equipment to do their jobs and to keep them safe. So I truly feel that by reducing law enforcement budgets will reduce us to get proper training and the proper equipment and the proper education so we can protect and serve our citizens the correct way. I think we should be really focusing on our public and our citizens that we are sworn to protect and serve, and hopefully give them the idea that we're going to do the right thing, and we need to get rid of people who are not doing the right thing for the right reasons, and make sure that we earn our public trust back from our citizens. And now going forward, they will have that truth, as I like to say, and that trust and transparency in our agencies going forward, that we're going to do the right thing all the time and be good stewards of the public's budget as well.
All right, but then there's confusion. And Andrea, can we hear you now? Okay, Andrea. Okay, welcome. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to defunding police. And people think they get it, they think they understand it, but they really don't. So when people come to you and say, what do they mean? They want to do away with the police in our neighborhoods. What is your answer to them?
So what the ACLU talks about is that we need to reimagine public safety. What we saw during the Black Lives Matter protests is that there are people in our communities who don't feel that they are being protected by many of things that happen from an armed response to problems in the community. That we need more alternatives than an armed response. When people have a mental health crisis, when there's a homelessness crisis, we need some alternatives. And so we need resources for our social response to community problems, because everybody wants to be safe. And so the question is, what are the best tools for promoting public safety and making sure that everyone in our community, regardless of race, color, national origin, feels safe. One of the important steps, for example, that Sheriff Owens has taken is to stop participating in the 287G program. And that's one of the promises that was made during the campaign. We're looking forward to, because many people in our community don't feel safe because of those kinds of issues. And so we want public safety that works for everyone in the community.
With that said, Professor Schindler, do you think that message is being sent properly? Because messaging is so important, and a lot gets missed in this particular messaging when it comes to defunding the police. What are your thoughts about the messaging?
Excellent question. And I want to give two perspectives on this. The first perspective I want to give is most Americans, well, not most, there's a substantial majority of Americans that land in the moderate column. And so when they hear words like defund the police, the default is, well, who's going to answer my 911 call at 2 a.m. when I have a burglar or when there's something going on, a riot, whatever it may be. And so I'm concerned by using the phraseology, defund the police, we're losing some of those moderate voters. I like to think of it in terms of restructuring the police, which starts with an attitude change. The idea that the police is there to serve and protect, as I'm sure Sheriff Owens would agree, but they're not an occupying force. And the fact that you're no longer participating in the federal program, I think, is remarkable. You take a look at the picture of a policeman in the 1960s, the cap on, the uniform. You take a look at a picture of the average police force in 2020. For gosh sakes, tanks, armored personnel vehicles. Some police forces are armed, including in Georgia, with these sort of things, which scares the heck.
Right.
We have to change. The police force has to change their focus from we're here to occupy to we are here to assist. And from my perspective, it starts right from the recruitment side. Why are we recruiting, and no disrespect to my friends in the military, I come from a military family, but why are we recruiting so much from the military when we should be recruiting from social work programs? When the majority of calls are for domestic issues, which oftentimes involve trauma and mental abuse, imagine instead of a police officer with a military background showing up, a police officer who's been trained to diffuse, to work with mental illness, and to work with trauma. I think it would shift the relationship between the governed and the police force.
Mr. Schindler, you're taking all this in and nodding your head. What do you think? What do you think about defunding the police? Is it a necessary concept? Is the messaging so mixed up that we don't need to use that term defunding the police anymore and call it something else?
Yes, I think the name is restructuring. Restructuring the police to better reflect its appropriate role to defend and protect. Focus on that word protect. That doesn't mean sending personnel carriers into highly volatile situations. More often than not, it means putting down your gun, putting down your taser, and engaging in dialogue. I watched a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests. We had one here in Grand Rapids, and it concerned me that the police were on the wrong side of the barriers in too many cases.
And at least if I may just jump back in there, if I may, I think Dr. has some good points, but I disagree to a certain extent on one a little bit. I think, and it's kind of the same, maybe I'm saying it a little differently. I think we should really, and I stated earlier, we should be focusing on servicing our public or our citizens. And which is what he's saying, I think, in a different way. But I think once we get back to focusing on those who we serve and protect, I think that is the most important thing. As you know, and police officers are not trained to be counselors. We're not mental health professionals. And a lot of times we're thrown into situations where those specific professions are really needed, and we're not equipped to do that. And I admit that. That's not what we do. We're not mental health professionals. But unfortunately, a lot of these calls call for mental health professionals to be there to make the decisions that we're just not trying to do. So that's why I stated earlier, training is key for us. need to receive proper training, proper equipment, and know how to deal with other people in different situations. So that's how I speak about defunding the police. Not defund it. We need the proper money to come to us so we can get better training, so we know how to deal better with individuals we're now accustomed to dealing with. But I cannot disagree with the doctor. I think he raised some great points. I think I just said the same thing a little differently.
Dr. Lord, I see you shaking your head. What are your thoughts on this? And does the term defunding the police work for you?
So I would agree with most everything I heard so far today. I think the word defunding the police gets people going down a path that doesn't bring about the change that's necessary. So I like to think when I hear the phrase refund the police, I want to make that hermeneutical switch to reimagine policing, reimagine it. And so, because when you start defunding, you line people up against the whole idea that policing and safety can be enhanced. We move from serve, protect, and respect. And so you train officers in a broader continuum around providing that. So you're enhancing policing in a lot of ways because you're looking at what's working and what's not working and addressing the things that are not working and enhancing the police force with different personnel and different training. So it's reimagining and stop using defund because people line up and then they argue against what we're trying to do. At the end of the day, policing can be better. You can hold them accountable, and everybody wins. And when you address the needs that need to be addressed, we're not trying to get rid of policing. We're trying to enhance something that serves the citizens and the police officers win at the end of the day. Both parties win because we establish a level of respect and care for the profession of policing and the citizens, as well as how they're being engaged.
Aaron, let's bring you into the conversation. You deal with civil rights, and is this a civil rights issue? Because in the minds of many people, defunding the police is a good thing because the police are viewed as an enemy in so many cases.
I think it definitely is a civil rights issue. I think especially with the onslaught from the war on drugs, we saw the policing of Black and brown communities, the over-policing, I should say, of Black and brown communities and the resulting violence. And I think also in tandem with the increase in police funding to over-police Black and brown communities, we saw a lack of community investment in terms of social services, also with education in the same communities. So to me, when I hear defund the police, and I know it means different things to different people, is just the need for a fundamental change and a need for community investment, especially in lower income communities. Black and brown communities definitely are lacking in a lot of critical resources and access to educational opportunities, access to employment opportunities. And those are the sorts of things that are needed and that you do not see in other areas like suburban neighborhoods that are less police versus New York City or a Washington, D.C. area.
You said community investment, community trust. Andrea, those are words that a lot of people take issue with because they don't trust their politicians. They don't trust their law enforcement. So how do we begin healing and bridging that gap?
One of the things that happened in this election is that people voted for law enforcement professionals who talked about how they were going to relate to communities. That happened in Cobb County, it happened in Gwinnett, it happened in Chatham, in Macon-Bibb, and so people are recognizing, and I think the Black Lives Matter movement reminded us that these are elected officials. And so we can elect people who are from our community, who represent our community, and who are going to be concerned about the safety of the people in our community. And that means, the things that make for prevention. So for example, in the 90s, when we had after school programs, one of the things you found is that the crime rate, both with young people as both victims and as perpetrator of petty crime, that went down because they had after school recreation programs. So very often that community investment is also a crime prevention strategy, and it keeps everybody safer, and allows our young people to go on and have the careers and have the lives as adults that we wanted to have. So, we have across the state of Georgia, we have elected new leadership in the criminal justice space. And so I think it's an opportunity for communities to follow those votes, and really hold those elected officials accountable. And I think, we certainly heard many of them, like Sheriff Owens, talk about, being a servant in the community. And so, we have that. We are still in a democracy. It was a little close. We are still in a democracy, and we have really elected, some very fine criminal justice professionals across the state that we hope we can really show in Georgia, what community-based public safety approaches really look like. Because as I tell people, I'm an older, 5'2" Black woman, so I am concerned about public safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I want prevention, right? I don't want people. We don't want our young people going to jail. We don't want we want the prevention. We want the engagement at the front end, so that our young people will continue to thrive and go to school and do the things that, the folks on this call were able to do, and have productive lives. That's what everyone wants, for our young people in this community, in our communities.
And I think a lot of people want perfect order. And with that said, I want all of y'all to take your minds back. A lot of, people can't stop talking about what happened in Washington last Wednesday and the images that are etched in your mind. And one in particular for me is the protesters climbing over the wall to get to the Capitol. What are your thoughts about the safety, democracy, the system, what's working and what isn't, when you think about how it's just been compromised at the top level there? Dr. Lord, I'll begin with you.
Wow.
First of all, how did you feel? How did you feel when you saw those images, and as it relates to you, your community, your home, your thoughts, not necessarily your politics, but where you were with, the state of America?
So I was at work and I couldn't stop looking at the television. I was saddened and disturbed at what I saw, because you see that in many other places in the world. And to see it happen at the Capitol, and I've been to the Capitol. And so it was heart-wrenching, it was sad, it was not a good day. And it just, to witness what happened, it was troubling. And then wondering why, the question is, why are we doing this? And how did we get here? What was some of my thoughts and concerns that day?
Sheriff Owens, that's a great question. How did we get here? Because all of that had to start in community, right?
Yes.
And make its way up to Washington. How did we get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, let me just say, I want to be very clear about this. I think this was domestic terrorism at its best, without a doubt. I've served in the military for over 30 plus years. I've been in combat zones, and these are the type of things we see overseas in third world countries. We don't expect to see this in the United States of America. It's unheard of. As you say, the images of those men and some women climbing the walls to breach our sacred state capitol, those things are a national capital, rather, but it's just unheard of. You just don't think that would happen here in the United States. Right now, it's a dangerous time for America. It is a dangerous time for America, but we have to find a way that we can come together. And that's going to start here at these communities, making sure we're bridging the gap between the law enforcement and community, making sure we're on the same sheet of music. We can talk when we have issues without resulting in violence. They know they can come in and trust their law enforcement to do the right thing when no one's looking. That's what we got to start getting back to, working in communities, building that trust level back. And from the law enforcement standpoint, from my perspective, it was clear and obvious that the capitals were not prepared that day for that mob. We're not prepared. And I really feel they should have been. With the intelligence agencies we have, I feel they should have been notified. And we should have had the same type of presence that we had at Black Lives Matter marches. Same presence. If we're going to put 5,000 troops out there, we should have been 10,000 in the state capitol with the same show of force. So I think there was a lack of communications. Could have been more than that, possibly. But I just think we got to really get to the root of that problem and figure out what happened. And allow something like that to happen again on the United States of America grounds.
Yeah, and a lot of people felt if the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol could be breached, then any place could be breached. Aaron, you're in D.C. You're coming to us from the nation's capital. What were your feelings when you were seeing that, and specifically about your community and what may have happened, what may have brought us here, what may have led to that?
I think for one, I think I was overall surprised at the lack of the police presence. I think for months we were aware of President Trump's statements in terms of not supporting the peaceful transfer of power and his calls for people to disrupt the process. So I was a bit surprised that the Capitol Police were not prepared to handle the situation. One of my colleagues was actually following it closely, and I was working and not paying as much attention because I didn't want to give attention to their movement. And he kept encouraging me. He's like, no, they're like storming the Capitol. They're like in the Capitol. They're breaking the windows. And to me, I was like, what in the, like, how is this even happening? There were no barricades in place to stop them when they were literally there to disrupt the electoral, like the confirmation of the electoral colleges. The certifications, and it was kind of mind-boggling to me, honestly. And I kept thinking about how the staffers and members of Congress' lives were put in danger unnecessarily, and how a lot of them were allowed into the Capitol. And I think we can be, even though 5 people lost their lives that day, I think we can be grateful that there weren't more lives lost and that there weren't, potential assassination attempts on the Speaker of the House or any other members of Congress. And I think that that's kind of what's getting lost. I disagree with the sheriff in terms of that the police force should have been equal to what was shown at Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter was more of a Black liberation movement, and it's a peaceful protest at heart. While there were people there who were not supportive of Black Lives Matter and the peacefulness for which the protests were organized, I don't think the police presence at the Black Lives Matter protests were necessary. And I think it's not really comparable to people planning an insurrection against the country for what the show of force should be. We're setting a standard for what it should be. I think they're 2 different things.
Yeah, let me clarify. So if you don't mind, Ms. Lisa. And so what I was trying to equate that to was the amount of personnel that had showed up for that. Right. The same amount we should have had there. Not saying there was a peaceful protest. They shouldn't have had that amount of people there. I completely agree. My point I was trying to make was we should have had the same type of presence at the Capitol we had at this peaceful rally that we knew we were going to have at this rally that was going to turn violent. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Right.
Well, Andrea, you come from civil rights legacy, and I can only imagine what your dad was saying when he was watching that unfold on TV. With that said, what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts about how far America has come, and then how far America had to step back in that moment?
Well, Lisa, I worked as chief of staff and as an aide to Senator Kennedy, so I know the privilege that it is to even walk on the floor of the House or Senate. This is something that most people who even work for members of Congress do not have an opportunity to do. And so to see it desecrated in that way was heart-wrenching and shocking. And, but the ACLU met over the weekend. Our entire national board voted unanimously in support of the impeachment of Donald Trump. And you saw 10 Republicans support that impeachment vote this week, because I think the evidence will ultimately show that this was an intentional act by this president. That the fact that the Capitol was not guarded properly, that the fact that the Defense Department did not come to the aid. Members of Congress were on the phone with governors pleading for support and assistance. It was being repeatedly denied. That there were many. This was not an omission. This was a commission. That this was an intentional attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. And I think that ultimately, when there is a real commission to evaluate the events of that day, that's what we will see. And the president has been calling for these people to come to DC on the day of the 6th for months. So this was something that happened in plain sight. I think, I was a friend of Yolanda King when her dad was assassinated. So the violence of white supremacy is not something that surprises me. It saddens me that it can be, but this is a danger that is a persistent danger in this country. We began to see more of these hate groups with the election of Barack Obama being, as the sheriff said, sort of acting and beginning to organize. And so I think this is a very real, the FBI, Christopher Wray, who's nobody's liberal, says that, domestic white supremacist terrorism is the biggest threat that we face right now in this country. So I think we just have to acknowledge that this is something that will continue to have to be confronted. It's a big challenge for my organization, which is very concerned about civil liberties. And how we balance these civil liberties, with protection and the ability of our officials to fight this what is clearly domestic terrorism. The Capitol has not been ever breached, even during the Civil War, by any domestic force. But even in the Civil War, you never saw the Confederate flag in the Capitol.
Wow. Professor Schindler, with your studies, can you gather what's happening here? What has happened to our foundation where democracy can be disrespected on this kind of level?
As someone who formerly worked in the Capitol and has dedicated my life to studying this document, our Constitution, teaching our Constitution to the next generation of ministers of justice, as someone who's defended the Constitution repeatedly in court in civil rights cases and the like, I was horrified. I was horrified to literally see this document that I venerate, which is the cornerstone of our freedoms, literally being stomped on. But let me say this. There's a small sliver of light here. And this is the sliver. The Constitution sets guardrails to ensure that despotism does not become the law of the land. And despite the efforts of a potential despot, those guardrails held. They were bruised, they were bumped, but the states responsible for holding the elections certified the elections in an honest, ethical way. And in Georgia, 2 Republicans, as it turns out, stood up and did the right thing under our Constitution. I give them credit. Congress, the Senate, despite great pressure from white supremacists and others, stood up and certified the election. The House of Representatives, despite great pressure from the most powerful man in America, stood up and did its job. And I'm no fan of the vice president, notwithstanding my haircut, but even the vice president, despite the pressure he was under, stood up and followed the dictates of the Constitution. So despite the horror, let us take some solace in the fact that the document remains vibrant, that the doctrine remains a cornerstone and a beacon of freedom. But it will only be that way, Lisa. It will only remain that way if people like the 5 folks I'm looking at now and the people in our audience continue to give it the respect it deserves and are willing to defend it against the rise of not the rise, it's been around forever, the increased visibility of white supremacy. The Constitution's been bruised. This is a warning sign. We need to double our efforts to defend our freedoms.
When you say double our efforts, and Dr. Lord, I'll ask you because something thought-provoking is about to come out of your mouth there, I can see. Defending the Constitution, a lot of us don't know the Constitution. How important is it for us to sit back, go back to the basics, and learn the Constitution of the United States?
Well, I think it's essential that we all learn the Constitution and we study it. A lot of us who are here probably learned it when we were in school.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's being taught now is the question. The question was whether the president who occupies the White House even understand or study the Constitution. You know, we've had that question on the horizon. So, you know, we start with that, and that, you know, the question when that person was a candidate, did they understand the Constitution? But I think what I wanted to say is that no one said it yet, but we have to also understand the power of lies and propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When lies and propaganda are believed and people are motivated on those lies and propaganda and act from them, and we've seen that happen throughout history. Mm-hmm. So part of what happened is the long journey or the crashing of lies and propaganda that people are fed and people act on, which is different than the other movements. When you're fighting for social justice and Black Lives Matter, that's not based on lies, not based on propaganda. It's based on people's lived experience. And so when people try to join the two together, it's a false paradigm if you try to do that. But propaganda and lies, people believe them, they acted on them, and that's what we saw the result of this long 4 or 5 years of feeding the untruths to people, and people start believing them, and that's what happens.
And again, Aaron, we're back to messaging. How important is it for community to understand the Constitution, to understand state law, local laws, simply to be educated?
I think it's vital to have an education. I think is the foundation of our society. It's how, like, through public education is how we kind of shape the ideals and people's analysis and their ability to actually assess the truth of a matter. And I kind of think, in line with all of the untruths that have been shared and all of the fake news and everything that's been kind of spit out over the past 4 or 5 years, what we've seen kind of in the public education system in the US is just kind of the lack, like, from teaching to the test. And it's just like there's a whole lack of people developing any sort of analytical skills to actually assess the truth of the matter. I think a lot of people are kind of, they take what is said to them and they're not really assessing it. So if someone says that, you know, they're stealing the election and these votes don't matter, even though there's no proof of it, people aren't actually thinking to go, oh, let me actually look at the number of votes that were cast. Let me actually look at other news sources to compare how they're portraying this information to me. And I think you have to have people who know to do that. And I think where we are as a citizenry, we don't really have, it seems like people aren't aware of the laws that govern them. I think people aren't aware of the Constitution. People can't name the three, like they don't know about the Supreme Court, Congress, and the presidency. And I think people aren't aware of the president's power as well in relation to the states. And I see this not only with from the general public, but I also have had conversations with like friends who are college educated. And I remember there were calls for President Obama to pardon someone who was on death row. I think this may have been back in like 2015 or 2014. I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, but they were just like, why can't he just pardon him? And it's like he was convicted in the state courts, so he can't. The governor would need to. But there were so many calls online for people just like upset with President Obama for not saving the man's life. And I think
not really
a lot of public education. And I think it starts kind of with the K through 12, but also as adults, we need to challenge ourselves to actually be aware of like, how does our government actually operate? What are our rights under the government? Like, what are our constitutional rights? What are our civil rights under law? And I'm not sure who has to start that process, But I think there needs to be kind of a conversation for more public education. And I think when you have educated citizens, you have better politicians who are in office as well, too. And we don't have kind of what we've seen over the past 4 years of people kind of going against the will of the voters. And you don't have that threat to democracy.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of confusion now. This is the second time President Trump will be impeached, but a lot of people are wondering what the 25th Amendment is. How does it work? Why do some people want it? Why, So, Professor Schindler, can you shed some light onto some of our viewers who are curious about that? They want to know, what is the 25th Amendment and why are people not in favor of it at this point in his presidency?
In 1967, following the assassination of President Kennedy, we realized we didn't have a good system in place for when a president became disabled or we needed a succession in office. And so we amended our Constitution. One of the great things about the Constitution is if we don't like it, we can amend it, which we've done 27 sometimes. And so the Constitution was amended in 1967 to basically set up a system for when a president becomes disabled. There's really two paths here. If the president himself determines that he's disabled, he can basically write a letter to Congress saying, I'm disabled, whereupon the vice president automatically takes over. And in fact, this particular provision has been exercised 3 times in our history. Twice when George W. Bush went in for a colonoscopy. He was going to be disabled for an hour. So he wrote a letter to Congress and said, the VP is going to take over during this period of time.
Right.
But the more important provision for today's discussion is the 4th section of the 25th Amendment, where basically if the vice president and a majority of the cabinet determine that the president is disabled, that term is not defined. It doesn't mean a physical disability or mental disability. It means the vice president and a majority of the cabinet feel the president is no longer capable of executing his office. They can write a letter to Congress and say the president is disabled, whereupon immediately the vice president takes office. Well, then there's a procedure after that. If the president disagrees, he can also write Congress and says, I'm fine, whereupon a fight breaks out and Congress has to decide, is the president disabled or not? As you know, most folks know, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, among others, encouraged the vice president to enact the 25th Amendment, to take advantage of it to remove President Trump from office. It was a shortcut to avoid having to impeach. And despite the fact that the vice president did stand up to the president during the county electoral votes, he sort of went back into his turtle shell and said, nope, I'm not going to do it. So it all starts with the VP. I see the sheriff laughing. It all starts with the VP. The VP is not willing to do it. So at this point, the 25th Amendment is off the table. Now, it comes at such an interesting time because we only have 6 more days to survive with this particular president in office. And as folks know, the House has now impeached the president, whereupon the action goes up to the Senate. The Senate can remove the president from office with a 2/3 vote. Problem, the Senate's not in session currently. They're all sitting at home. So I don't have a Senate to even vote in the next 6 days as to whether to remove this president. And because of the vagaries of my friends in Georgia and the way their election worked out, McConnell remains in office, or excuse me, the head of the Senate until the 20th. So essentially, folks, even though we're in a situation where the House of Representatives has impeached the president, nothing's going to happen until the president is already out of office as a result of the election of Joe Biden and his swearing in his inauguration on January 20th. So it all comes at a very strange time.
And then explain the impeachment process. A lot of people say he's been impeached and that's it. No, like you said, it goes to trial. And what happens after that?
Yeah, impeached, technically the term we use is he's been impeached, but now he has to be tried. The Senate, the trials in the Senate, we saw this a year ago. The Chief Justice presides, all the senators have to take an oath. And then, based on a case from the 1970s, where the Supreme Court said the Senate gets to set the rules, the Senate gets to decide how to run that trial. They don't have to have any hearings if they don't want to. They could just vote, or they could delay it out for months and have, committee hearings and then full hearings. It's 100% up to the Senate how they want to run that proceeding. So technically, nothing stops the Senate from meeting tomorrow. And so long as 2/3 of the senators, it takes 2/3, vote in favor of impeachment, the president is then forcefully removed from office. But again, that's not likely to happen.
With that said, Sheriff Owens, why on earth would you want to run for office? Why on earth would you want to hold an elected office in 2021 with all of this going on?
Good question. For me personally, I thought I could bring forth a difference and a change, which I thought my community desperately needed at this time. So that's the main reason. I think we just needed a change here in Cobb County. And I thought, as someone asked, well, so why did you do it? I said, if not me, why not me? And I felt I was the best person to lead the Cobb County Sheriff's Office in the future. And so I took that leap of faith and jumped out there, and grace of God and the voters of Cobb County, I won. So now I got to pull my pants up, roll my sleeves up, and get to work.
And with that said, your campaign was based on going back to the basics, transparency, meeting the people where they are, talking to the people. How important is that in healing our nation, healing our communities, especially in wake of the racial protests and unrest that we had over the summer?
I think it's critically important. Like, as you said, that's what I ran my platform on. Restoring truth in the sheriff's office and bridging that gap between law enforcement and the community. We have to go back in, me as a now elected official, I feel we have to go back in and rebrand our community. And I want to change some ways we do business. The sheriff's office had what we call a community outreach program. I'm changing that to a community engagement program. I want to engage, I want to outreach, I want to engage, I want to talk to people, sit down, find out what they need, and have that personal interaction with them. Cobb County is a very diverse county, and I know we got some other panelists on here that's not from Georgia, but we live in a very diverse county here in Cobb County. I want to make sure that we're connecting with everyone in our county, not just certain sections, but everyone, different races, nationalities, everything. I want to connect with everyone. That's how I think we start to bring everyone together. I'm bringing on a Spanish speaking liaison into my sheriff's office to help bridge that gap in that community, so I can make sure I'm always reaching out and connecting with that community. I want to have quarterly meetings or briefings with the public. So first I can find out what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and then I can hear the concerns of my community. Today I was fortunate enough to announce, our 100-day plans, what I plan on doing in the first 100 days. And one of our community know this is what your sheriff is going to try to do in these first 100 days. And I'm going to do everything I can to accomplish those goals. And so those are things that I'm doing, trying to get back and help to restore that trust and faith in the sheriff's office within the community. But rebuilding that trust is a priority of mine, and I'm going to work very hard every day to earn the community's respect and trust.
Sheriff, if I may say, you and I just met, but the fact that you're here participating in this important forum speaks volumes about your priorities and your commitment to your community, and I applaud you for it.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that.
With that said, how do you restore faith, Aaron, in the judicial system alone? Because, there are a lot of issues there that foster a lot of mistrust in people. A lot of people, say, I'm innocent, I was wrongly accused, but it's turning out that they are. So what does that mean for the system? Does that need a major overhaul as well? And, what does that mean in terms of prosecutors specifically?
I think it's a bit complicated. There's not really like a bright line that we need to get through. I think for a first step that's important is for transparency. And I think that what we've seen for decades now, especially when it comes to the policing of Black people in the United States, is that there hasn't been a fair administration of justice. It hasn't been a fair and impartial process. And then you have the Black community view police departments and prosecutors' offices as impartial and partial and not objective. And I think you really have to have that transparency. So as a first step, and it's not the answer, not the final answer, it's not going to solve everything, but I think it's an important way, and the way that the sheriff is saying he wants to have community engagement and kind of bring in the community to get their perspective on everything and build that trust. I think that there has to be a huge cultural shift in order for people to actually start to believe in the justice system and that it is actually equal justice under law for everyone. But I think transparency and openness is an important first step. And we have to start looking at
Andrea, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we have to honestly start looking at and assessing bias and how we're actually going to tackle it. Because I think it's clear people have different implicit biases, but I think we haven't found a way as a society or as people to kind of actively, appropriately address it. So I think that there's a need for more research in terms of how we can actually address implicit bias and the ways that it's actually impacting our justice system. And hopefully that will move us to a more just society where people of all colors and backgrounds and socioeconomic status can actually start to believe and have more faith in the justice system.
That is fact one of the questions from one of our viewers to the sheriff about that implicit bias. But Andrea, you were shaking your head because I'm sure you hear from a lot of people who feel that they're targeted by police, who are constantly targeted by police. And, you know, you have the people at the top saying we're changing the system, we're doing this, but it's not trickling down, it seems. So
a lot of what we've done, you know, I mean, I think if there is any message from 2020, it's that your vote matters. And so what we've seen in Cobb County is that the entire top leadership of the county has changed. So there is a sheriff who ran on a criminal justice reform platform. There is a district attorney who ran on a criminal justice reform. There is a new county commission, Lisa Cupid, the chair, who came to the first we had a forum over a year ago with the community because 50 people had died in the jail under the old sheriff. People said, you know, we're in this modern diverse suburb and we have a sheriff from the 1950s. And so they changed that. And so we have to also understand that we can change the people who make these decisions, that make the policies. We've worked across, Georgia has actually been bringing down the incarceration rate, and we can really accelerate that with, you know, bail reform practices, with, you know, reducing, you know, changing our ability to use, say, civil fines instead of criminal fines for some of the, you know, misbehavior that we encounter. And so different leadership can behave differently. And you know what we kind of say is hope, vote, advocate. So the the marching was the hope. The voting has happened, and now we have to advocate and make sure that our elected officials make that they change the behavior, they change the practices, they change the way that that public safety takes place in our communities. And I think, you know, across Metro Atlanta, we are really poised to insist that those things happen. And you know, and what people, the governor has said he wants to change the citizens arrest statute in the state of Georgia because not only because when Ahmaud Arbery was killed down in Savannah, down in Glenn County, they threw out the prosecutor that failed to prosecute the people who killed him. So elections matter, and voting different leadership makes a difference in the policies in our communities.
With that said, let's move to Sheriff Owens. Your platform was transparency, and there have been some issues at the Cobb County Adult Facility there, inmate deaths, and people say inmates have rights to, and their stories need to be told to. How do you plan to use this transparency of a platform to get it right for the citizens who have a whole lot of questions?
I think he's muted.
We can't hear you. I think you're muted, Sheriff Owens. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I want to say, you know, first and foremost, my thoughts and prayers goes out to the families who have lost loved ones in the detention center in Cobb County. You know, here's a few things that I'm working on going in the future to hopefully to eliminate some of these things. You know, first and foremost, want to make sure we have the best health providers that's providing health to the inmates there to make sure they receive proper treatment. not only the health treatment, but also for their mental health care as well. So, you know, once they come through those doors, they're in my custody and control. So I have a duty to make sure I take care of them and give them everything they need, whether it's mental health treatment or healthcare treatment. And that's what I plan on doing. So we're currently reviewing the contracts and the vendors that we have providing these services. One, to make sure they're providing the service that we paid them to do. And two, they're providing the best services that the citizens of Cobb County deserve, because A, they are human beings. Still, just because you were arrested, you are still a human being. You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and provide the best services while they're in my custody control. So those are the things we want to do very off the beginning to make sure that we're giving everyone the opportunity there. Second, we want to look at some educational programs in our facility, so we can make sure that they leave better than where they came in. You know, give them some education, help them get GEDs, teach them some life parenting skills. You know, we have a lot of, unfortunately, detainees between the ages of 17 and 25 who have kids and have no life parenting skills or even how to raise those kids properly. So we want to make sure we give them the proper tools so they get out. Not only can they be better for themselves, they can be better for their children when they get out. Because I want to have an empty facility. You know, I'll be the happiest sheriff you want to see if my jail is empty. I'm happy.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure they come once and don't come back. And so I want to provide them with that, even as we get out of the COVID situation, help provide them work opportunities. I'm talking to our local community business leaders of helping us try to find good, nice, well-paying jobs from our community to get them out of the facility so they don't have to go back doing things they were that got them in here. So we're working for that to try to increase that going forward. But I think that is something I'm doing, hopefully, that I can give back to my community and give back to them so they can have a better opportunity to be successful. And when I'm talking about these jobs, I'm not talking about jobs that, you know, not that it's a bad job, making low paying jobs. I'm talking about jobs making $20, $30 an hour so they can be successful. You know, I want a partnership with some of the local unions, IBEW, who can help us get them in some good trade schools and get them ready for those jobs so they can be successful in the future.
One question to you and to all of you is, how do you get things right on the front end? Why, you know, instead of us having these discussions of what to do, how to do, and backtrack, first things first, how do we get it right? We've done this over and over again. We've seen it over and over again. How do we get it right the first time? Professor Schindler.
You know, it starts at the very beginning. Prenatal care. You know, we have these young folks get pregnant, don't get good health care. That results in any number of problems with fetuses. It then moves on to parenting skills and parenting classes. Sheriff, I couldn't agree with you more. Just because your parents may have been, not yours, but people's parents may be dysfunctional doesn't mean you have to be a dysfunctional parent. So parenting classes, and maybe mandatory parenting classes if you're involved in the criminal justice system. I love that idea. It goes to Head Start. Refinance Head Start. So it truly gives children, particularly children in communities that are less affluent, the opportunity to get a head start. It goes to public education. Don't get me started on the rise of voucher programs. Public education is the cornerstone of our communities. So we need to make sure that we have well-paid, excellent teachers, and that schools have the ability to get rid of teachers, our unions, in a fashion that makes sure we have the best of the best teaching our kids. And then it goes to scholarship opportunities. I am blessed to teach in the most diverse law school in the country other than the HBCs, giving people an opportunity, first gen. A lot of backward cat frat boys in law school. God bless them. I want to see more first gen citizens from diverse communities in law school and getting the opportunities that I had. So it begins with prenatal care and it doesn't end until you die. Good health care.
So Georgia right now is the 40th worst place in the country to raise a child. We are not investing. You know, our maternal mortality rate, our infant mortality rate, women aren't protected during pregnancy on the job. You know, it's just you know, we have bright spots here and there, the scholarship, Georgia PK, our technical and community colleges, but the social safety net in the state of Georgia is horrendous. And that is one of the things we've got to start building in, that safety net for our families, which right now, with the COVID, the food insecurity, people being evicted, I mean, we have an incredible crisis that we will have to.
Back to those starting young and catching them early. Where do we go with our Black boys who are racially profiled, who are pulled over, who are shot and who are killed? How do we get that right before it turns into something devastating like it did with Ahmaud Arbery? Sheriff Owens.
You know, I think for me, it starts with us as Black men being mentors, going back into our community, mentoring young kids in our community. I think it's important that we go back and do that. And I think that shows our young men what we should be doing, how we should be carrying ourselves, and et cetera. And also teach them how to conversate and deal with the police. Sometimes we don't have enough knowledge, for lack of better terms, to deal with the police, know what to say, and how they should be acting around the police. And I think that's something we should go back and tell our children, that this is what you should and shouldn't do, and educate them on these things. Because unfortunately, we've had too many Black lives taken by the police. So we got to figure out, where's that disconnect? Is it something our children are doing wrong that maybe the other children are not? Is it something? Is it because how we dressing? We got to make sure we find the root of this. Or is it just because we got some bad officers out there doing the wrong thing? So we want to find out what's causing these issues. But us as men, we have to talk to our children, mentor them, and let them know, hey, this is what the world we're living in today, and give them the guidance they need to be safe out on the streets when they're riding and actually just doing the everyday thing. So we can provide them the best knowledge we can from what we know and how the times are now. I think that's extremely important. And I think also getting some of our local organizations involved. I happen to be a proud member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and we have gone back into community mentorship programs. We have one called the 1911 League. We go to schools and we teach young men how to be young men, how to tie ties, how to properly groom themselves, how to deal with adults, and how to deal with policemen so they come off in the right way and it's not coming off the wrong way. So I think those things that we can do as individuals and as community leaders, as well as community organizations, let's grab our young men and women for that aspect. We have some sororities to do that as well, and talk to them and mentor them and tell them how to go down the right road.
Dr. Lord, I saw you listening intently, and I don't know if you want to share part of your story, but you've been through a heck of a lot, and you've written a book about it, and we heard about it earlier. How do you absorb all of this? For those kids who don't get that great start, and how do we nurture them? How do we pull them back? How, as a society, do we get it right? Dr. Lord, I'm going to have you pause a minute. I think you're on mute as well.
Yes,
there you go.
Sorry.
There you go.
I would echo what the sheriff has said. But I also want to add another twist that I haven't heard someone talk about yet. I think that we should hold a summit with the Black men should hold a summit with police officers. Because we're talking about Black boys, but no one is really having that deep conversation with police officers to educate them on that, the reality of growing up Black in America. And police have a lot of discretion to use. And police they use too much force. So the continuum of force, and how do we get police to understand or to retrain them and to help them, prepare them to be proactive in a diverse culture. It starts with the hiring practices. We hire these police officers and we don't really ask them questions about diversity, equity, or bias. We don't ask them questions related to how are you contributing to diversity? How are you advancing diversity? And how are you growing from diversity and equity in your life? Because if we have police officers today who are on the force and do not have friends or colleagues from different races in our society today, then that police officer is not prepared to lead and serve and respect. And not just police officers, teachers, in all professions. And we have to raise the standard of practices when we hire people. We want people to be culturally diverse. And so our schools need to start teaching more. And hopefully in this new administration, we can wake up and realize that we have to have cultural competency across the board. And if you don't have cultural competency across the board, you cannot advance in this society any further. You hold the society backwards instead of forward. And I'll stop there and let someone else chime in.
Well, society, is built on state government, local government, and then national government. The state legislature convened this week, and we as a group, the Links, we go to the Capitol every year and meet our legislators and hear the issues that they're talking about. But how do we, Aaron, really get in their ear? Tell them what our issues are, tell them what our concerns are to help put a Band-Aid or improve our community.
One, I think vote, as I feel like Andrea has said repeatedly. I think that matters a lot, but then I also think that people often don't call or go to call their local legislator's office to let them know what their concerns are and raise issues that they're having within their community or laws that they want to see changed or improved or added. I think people need to write to their local legislators as well. I think you have to have that level of engagement because that holds our politicians accountable for what we actually want to see and have in our society. At the federal level, we see most of the time for people who are lobbying for federal government, it's like large corporations or companies. And that's what I feel like a lot of people generally talk about. And you also would see that at the state level and the local level too, where local businesses are doing it, but you're not hearing from local citizens. So oftentimes people can kind of run on platforms where they may say, I'm going to do X, and then they never do it. Or it's just kind of an idea like, I'm going to improve education in the county, and they're not really saying the steps that they're going to take to improve education. I think we need to actually ask those hard questions, schedule meetings with them because they are open. Their offices are open and they're accessible to us because we're the people who make up the democracy. And I think that it just needs to be an increased level of engagement by the citizens to hold them accountable.
Andrea, you kind of work in that area. What are we not doing? It's easy for us to blame the lawmakers, but what aren't we doing as people, as citizens, as voters? What aren't we doing? Right.
I think, what Aaron has said, being in contact, links are very influential people, and so I think, making themselves heard. I will be endeavoring along with Candace to, make more people more aware of some of the issues. So right now, for example, the governor's proposing to restore some of the education funding to the budget that was taken away last year as a result of the COVID crisis. So certainly, that we can advocate, for the budget, as they say in the church, where your money lies, there's where your heart lies. So we want, we want we want education. We've got the Georgia pre-K program, but it's not universal in the sense that it's a limited amount of spaces. So everyone is, it's free if you can get into a space. So we would love, it would be so important to see that, every 4-year-old really was entitled to have a pre-K slot. And I think these are things, members of the legislature are in our communities, and particularly, and we need to just be talking to them and really reaching out to them, forming relationships. Don't wait even until legislative session, but, all along the way, finding out, who they are and how, and letting them know the things that we're concerned about. So I think as the statewide links, we've made we were very effective in getting the human trafficking legislation passed. And I think we can continue to work as a network of links to really continue to make our state better, and have the policies really reflect the values. It'll be a lot easier with Kamala Harris as vice president to get a lot of these things done, because we won't be fighting against a federal administration, but really will have support and have resources. So there'll be a lot more resources coming from the federal government for all of these things that we're talking about today.
With that said, let's head back to our nation's capital as we slowly wind down this evening, because everybody's talking about it, everybody's thinking about it. It's everywhere you go. You know, we're disheartened by what happened last week. Professor Schindler, leave us with what you're feeling tonight, given the state of democracy in our nation's capital that is surely trickling down to all the various states and legislatures and constituents. What are you feeling, and what do we need to do to feel better?
First, let me piggyback on Andrea's outstanding observations. I want to take a poll. How many people out there donated money to Sheriff Owen's candidacy? How many people out there went down and actually volunteered and worked for a candidate that you support? How many people gave money to a candidate you support? After the Constitution was written, the delegates had previously taken an oath of silence. And back in those days, you kept your oaths. Imagine that. They took an oath of silence, and there are no leaks on what they wrote. And when they were done, Benjamin Franklin walked out the front door of Independence Hall and was asked by a lady of society, "What kind of government have you brought forth, Mr. Franklin?" And his response, apocryphally, was, "Republic, madame, if you can keep it. If you can keep it." Because our system of government, our freedoms depend on we, the people, the first lines of the Constitution. Who is responsible for the state that we're in? We're responsible for it. Not the politicians, not Donald Trump. We're responsible for it because we're the ones that ultimately have the choice. And so I'm heartened at many levels. Despite everything, I see real hope out there. I see hope because the guardrails held. I see hope because I've been invited to this conversation. Me, let's be honest, an old white guy from Michigan. You were kind enough to invite me into this conversation so we can find our common ground and work together. So, you know what? Go to that neighbor of yours that maybe had a different political sign than yours and get to know him a little bit or her a little bit. See if you can bring her or him along towards this slow trudge towards greater justice. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox. It begins with us. And I applaud all my fellow speakers, and I applaud the audience members who turned off Netflix to hear this conversation. God bless you. We need more of exactly what's going on in this conversation.
Yeah, you know, we have freedom, you know, to speak and say what we want and when we want. But what happens when the president's Twitter account gets suspended? You know, what's the difference between hate speech and protected First Amendment speech? And where has that led us tonight, Dr. Lord?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was all excited. Dr. Lord, let me just turn off my microphone.
Dr. Lord, I think you need to unmute yourself so we can hear your
I
first.
think Dr. Schindler should start with that. I yield to the professor my time.
Okay.
You're too kind, Dr. Lord.
I mean, you know,
I'll be able to add something at the end, but I yield my time to the professor.
Yeah, but quickly someone chime in about the First Amendment.
So, I mean, so the simple thing is that you can't yell fire in a theater, right? You have a right to speak, but you can't incite violence. You can't incite people to endanger other people. And this is something that, I mean, the president's Twitter feed has put people's lives at risk. I mean, you know, and people are now beginning to, you know, even in Georgia, you know, the family of the Secretary of State, I mean, his family has been threatened because of the way that the president focused attention on him, on him and his family. People who worked for the company that made the, and so, you know, and so the record of the way the president has used his Twitter feed has literally endangered people's lives. It has put them at risk. And so violence is sort of inciting violence is kind of one of the difference between saying, you know, you know, when you make a specific threat, then you're crossing the line from saying, you know, I hate Republicans to go kill this one, right? So, you know, this is a very important issue to the ACLU, and people of color have a much more sensitive idea about what is in fact hate speech that is threatening to them, that creates an environment where people of color are at risk. And so this is a very important discussion for us to have as a community, because when you dehumanize people, you make it easier for violence to be done against them. And so a lot of this dehumanizing language we're hearing now, especially from the women's movement, we really have to start talking about what kinds of language does put particularly, you know, women, people of color, LGBT people, make them more vulnerable to violence and to adverse consequences. And I'm sure the professor also has a more, you know, classical definition of, what the First Amendment protects. But this is, you know, this is a live issue, and it's especially live because we've had a president who has crossed the line long ago and not had his Twitter account revoked.
And with that said, that's kind of the foundation that put us where we are today, so to speak. So Dr. Lord, let me continue with you. How are you feeling about the state of America, and what do we need to do right now to begin? I say begin fixing because it will likely take some time.
So when you asked about speech, protected speech or freedom of speech does not absent from being responsible and accountable for what you say. And so you can have that freedom of speech. We all have that. But with that comes a lot of responsibility and accountability in how we communicate our messages to our society. Going forward, I think that we need to, and I'm doing it, try to bridge a conversation in between all sides. And that's very hard because people are wounded, they feel hurt, and they feel they're not been listened to. But you still have to do it. And in doing it, you're going to be misinterpreted. You're going to be misheard. You're going to be called all kinds of things. And you may lose a friend. But going forward, I believe that we have to extend the conversation. We have to be able to speak to whatever side we're on, be able to have our convictions, and be able to discuss what matters to us and what we have in common, and where we can find common ground. We look at the pandemic. We look at the economic situation we're in. There's common ground. There are a lot of people hurting in our society, and how do we address those needs in a common way that does not divide us but unites us? And so I believe in the Republic. I believe that we can together heal our wounds if we're willing to do it together.
Andrea, I'll begin with you. Continue with you, rather. How are you feeling? Where do we go from here to make things better?
Well, I came back to Georgia over a decade ago because I do believe that Georgia is a special place. I think our legacy of civil rights, our legacy of, we're the home of 2 Nobel Prize peace winners, Jimmy Carter and Martin Luther King. And I do believe the South has something to say. And I think Georgia spoke loudly and clearly, and that we do set an example. And I think we're going to continue to do that. and we are going to show that democracy is alive and well, that people do care, that people are willing to get out there and knock on doors and talk to their neighbors, and and vote during the holidays, in order to have a government that really represents their values and their principles and their ideals and their aspirations. So I'm very hopeful, but that because people are willing to do the necessary work, and Sheriff Owen's presence here is evidence that people are willing to do the hard work to bring about the change that we aspire to.
Aaron, I continue with you. How are you feeling, and is going to the polls enough to make a difference even during times like these?
I think I'm always generally hopeful for a better day. I think something my father always told me was that people generally don't know what they don't know. And I'm encouraged by conversations like this. And I think the events from last week are causing more people to have conversations among their family and with their friends for what they saw. And I think that a lot of people, it was very unsettling to them. And I think that it was, sometimes you have to be kind of jarred or like reach the bottom before you realize there's only up from here and what you need to do to actually improve society. So I think that we will see people more engaged. We saw a very high voter turnout in the last election in November, and I'm encouraged by that. And I think that more people will be engaged and are following political issues. And I think they're becoming more aware of how politics and everything impacts their daily lives, especially with the pandemic and the way that the COVID response was handled at the federal level and people not getting what they felt they should get from their government. And I think people are going to be definitely being more politically engaged, which I think is good for our democracy. So I'm hopeful.
And lastly, we end with our elected official. Sheriff Owens, a lot is on your shoulders in 2021. There's a lot to say to that, and we certainly do appreciate the role that you're playing, and certainly for running for sheriff. What are your feelings about the state of Georgia, state of America, and what needs to be tackled first to begin the process of healing and getting things right?
I think that the process of building that trust back is what we will have to tackle first. I think the state of Georgia set the example that if you come together as one state and get out and vote, you can choose your representative. You can choose who will represent you at the nation capital to make right decisions for you. So Georgia led that effort. And you can see the voter turnout we had, the amount of success I like to say we had in the voting process was great here in Georgia. So I think that's something the nation can see. As Ms. Andrea said, Georgia is history. It's historic.
Right.
And I think we made history again, as you know, in this election. So I think we're leading the way in that. But building trust back within our communities throughout the whole state and across America is key, not only for me as a politician, but for us as just bridge builders in our community. And I just want to go back to something that Aaron said. I think, and it reminded me of something my grandparents said, when I was coming up, they used to say, you got to teach those who know not, as she would say.
Right.
So meaning that as we have our youth coming up, not only do we have to mentor them, but we have to listen. We have to listen to what these young men and women have to say. Because sometimes we can be so much about forcing what we want to say to them, but we're not listening to what they're saying.
Right.
So listen, and then take what they say and then put that into our own actions, and then we can start mending some of these broken hearts we have here, and mending all these issues. But we got to listen to what these young men and women say. Listen to what our community have to say, like as also what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. Don't make it just to come in and say what you want to say and walk out. Listen, and then act upon it and act appropriately upon it. I think as an elected official, it's my first time getting in that role. I'm learning a lot, but what I do know from this point is that listening to your constituents is very important, and then acting and responding in a timely manner is extremely important. So I think Georgia has led the way with our voting effort. We got 2 senators up there that the state of Georgia voted on, and I think as we begin to heal in Georgia, as well as we're healing the nation, I think we're going to be okay.
Conversation still very important. I want to thank all of you. Quickly, Professor Schindler, in just maybe 5 seconds, can you explain the difference? Because conversation is so important. And Andrea touched on this, because hate speech is hate speak. It just incites so much in all of us. But what's the difference, and when does hate speech cross over from, our First Amendment rights to say whatever we'd like? And you're muted. You might want to unmute yourself. Okay.
The First Amendment is the first for a reason. It's the most important one because it's the cornerstone that allows conversations like this. For that reason, the test is very difficult to prove. In order to go after President Trump, because that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? Intent to incite imminent lawless, intending to send that crowd down with the intent of destroying the Capitol, and given the audience likely to incite imminent lawless conduct. We have the second. I don't think we have the first, to be candid.
Lastly, just all of you end in one word what you're feeling about the state of America, state of Georgia, state of your community. Professor Schindler, one word only.
Hopeful.
Andrea. Unmute yourself, sorry.
Sorry, I would also say hopeful.
Aaron.
Inspired.
Inspired. Dr. Lord.
Hopeful.
Hopeful. Sheriff Owens.
Prayer.
Love it. Y'all were fantastic. What a pleasure. Thank you for the conversation during this very, very important time. I feel better because I was a little weary after what happened last week. And thank you so much for going on the journey with all of us. Magnolia Links, we thank you for joining us tonight. Jada, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for being such a fabulous moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank my committee, Betty Ann Cook, Dr. Jarrett Landrum Manning, Kristen Pitts, Marla Curitan, and Sam Rakoot, and Marty Pinkston. Thank you all so much. We put a lot of love into this. I feel like the conversation was perfect. There are a ton of questions in the chat that we weren't able to cover, but we can get them answered for you. And our panelists, thank you all so much for taking this time. Thank you so much, Andrea, Aaron, Sheriff Owens, Dr. Lord, and Professor Schindler, who is my favorite constitutional law professor ever in life.
Good job.
Thank you all so much. And we just appreciate this conversation. And hopefully it inspired everybody to spin off their own conversations and educate their communities. So thank you. And we hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.